Go with the home team, Mississippi Farm Bureau, a man right now who does as good a job describing the action on the field for your ears as anyone you will find. Neil Price, he is the radio play-by-play voice at Mississippi State, kind enough to spend a few minutes with us this afternoon. Neil, great to talk to you, my man. How are you?
Doing good. Getting a little closer to football season and starting to feel like I've actually got something to do again. That summer vacation, you know, it's nice to have, but you get a little bit closer to the games, and it's like, man, I've missed this. So it's good to be back.
What do you feel like the vibe is around this Mississippi State team and fans in terms of the beginning of the season? Do you sense a lot of excitement? Do you sense a wait-and-see approach to this team? What does it feel like?
I think around the team, there is a confidence that they have experience, that they have depth that they've not had in Mike Leach's tenure, that they feel like can lead to success. In the fan base, I think there's cautious optimism. There's still some wait and see, but I do think that people that follow State want to be excited. They've read all the comparisons to other Mike Leach teams when he's had a third-year quarterback, and they feel like that Will Rogers is a guy who can produce those kind of results. And they hear good things about this defense and the depth and the experience that State has on that side of the ball and feel like maybe that can make a difference. But my experience has been State people have had their hearts broken, so they want to see it before they get all in. So I think that first game against Memphis, that game on the road at Arizona in week 2, I think those two games are big for getting everybody in the boat and seeing if this can be a good year.
One of the things that we've talked about, and Brian Haydad has pointed out a number of times, is that because of the way the season ended a year ago, this team has kind of flown under the radar going into this season. Whereas if they win the bowl game or if they win the final game of the regular season against Ole Miss, then there's a lot more hype, a lot more talk about Mississippi State going into this season, even though it's an entirely different team and the people that are gone would still be gone and the people that are back would still be back. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and I think there's to a degree, I think that's fair. I would tell you not making excuses for anybody, but being around the team in the bowl game, the team that State put on the field in that bowl game, the team that they had the bulk of the year was a very different team now. I mean, they were playing that thing with a skeleton crew. And a lot of that is COVID protocol and everything else, and it is what it is. I think anytime you drop back-to-back, especially at the end, there's this tendency for people to think, it was disappointing. That said, in the 2 weeks I've been around them in training camp, there hasn't been any talk of that. I think that the guys who are here have turned the page. The coaches certainly have, and they're excited about what could happen in 2 weeks when they play a Memphis team that beat them a year ago. I think that's squarely where the focus is. So national media, yeah, I get it. They dropped 2 games at the end. National folks don't see you a ton, even though you've got a recognizable coach who is his own brand in Mike Leach. I just think that there's this disposition, or there's this kind of conditioning with the national media where it's kind of like, okay, let's look at Alabama, let's look at Georgia, let's look at LSU, A&M. Oh, and they got, the rest of those guys too. I just think that's kind of what it is.
Yeah, there certainly may be something to that. Visiting with Neil Price, the voice of the Mississippi State Bulldogs. A year ago at this time, we didn't know a whole lot about Makai Polk. And then he goes out and has an incredible season, leads the team in receiving, such a big piece of that. Is there a Makai Polk on this team that we don't know about right now, that based on what you've seen through camp, you're like, you know what, that guy's got a chance to be the guy that we're talking about at the end of the year?
I don't know that there's one. And okay. Makai was kind of he was kind of a freak within this offense, because if you talk to Steve Spurrier Jr. and you talk to Drew Hollingshead, ideally I think what these guys would like to do is have two guys step up at each position and in theory split the production at those spots. So, they're going to play three receivers a lot, occasionally a fourth, and they just like to have 6 or 8 guys that they know they can put out there and depend on. I don't think they had that guy quite behind Mekhi last year. Caleb Ducking could have been that guy, and he showed us flashes of that. But Caleb had some stuff happen, with family tragedy there that cost him some games midway through the year. This year he's had a good camp. But they got a lot of guys at those outside spots, too, who are pushing him and pushing one another. So I think what's probably more likely is, instead of having one guy who has the kind of numbers that Mekhi Polk had a season ago, I think it's more that you're going to have a combination of guys who are going to split those numbers at positions, and hopefully that means you're going to see more guys rotating in and out. People are going to be fresher, and that offense is going to be able to play faster because of it.
One of the things we've talked about, that head scratcher is not the right way to describe it. It's just a different way of looking at the receiver position. There's so many coaches out there that will say, okay, who are my best 3 receivers or best 4 receivers? Those guys are going to be on the field. But it seems like it's an altogether different approach with Mike Leach. It's you play this position, and you play this position, and you play this position. And if you're going to get in the field, you got to be in the top 2 in that group, not necessarily kind of across the board. Do you see that, and does it make sense to you? And if it does, what do you think the rationale is there?
Well, let me preface it by saying I'm an idiot, okay, when it comes to football. I am. My knowledge of the inner workings of football is very limited, and when I walk into a room with coaches, I understand quickly exactly how little I know. When I really listen to Mike Leach and Steve Spurrier and Drew Hollingshead and some of the other really good people that are coaching on this state staff, you hear that on its face, and you're like, well, you've been conditioned, kind of like to your point, that you have 3 really good guys and they play wide receiver, and, one's in the slot and 2 are on the edge, and that's just what they do. That's their role. And the roles are defined here, too. But then you hear them go, well, we want to split it between 2 guys. And you think about that for a minute and go, okay, so there's not really a, quote, feature receiver. And then you think on that a little more, and you go, you know what, that might just be common sense. Because if you train 2 guys at each position, or if you've got enough depth, if you're lucky enough, you can train a 3rd at some of those positions. Well, what happens if one of those guys goes down? Well, you got another guy in theory who knows how to play the position, who's gotten reps, who's demonstrated some degree of success and maybe has confidence because of it, and the drop-off's not as steep. I think that is the method to the madness in a lot of ways. Listen, not to take away from the receivers. I think about the running back group here. Mm-hmm. There are 4 guys right now I think they could trot out there at running back and feel good about based on how they play, because they've trained them all over time. 2 of them had to play as soon as they got here because they didn't have depth 3 years ago. And now they've got some young guys in behind them who are good enough to push them and have different skill sets. And, you just feel like you can sustain a little more because of that. So I don't know that that's the logic behind any of it, Richard. But as I think about it with a very simple mind as it relates to football tactics, that's kind of what I think.
It's an interesting way to look at it. There's no question. And Mike Leach is a guy that is unique and has done things in his way for a long time, and it has worked at a really high level. Neil, always appreciate your time. Our time is always too short. Great catching up with you.